Hey Jake, how are you? How was your morning today?
Pretty good, actually. Busy, though. First I made coffee, then I checked my emails, and eventually I started work.
Wait, say that last part again.
First I made coffee, then I checked my emails, and eventually I started work.
Something sounds off.
What do you mean? That is a perfectly normal sentence.
Try it like this. First I made coffee, then I checked my emails, and finally I started work. Hear the difference?
Honestly, not really. They sound the same to me.
That is exactly the problem. Most learners treat finally and eventually like they are the same word. They are not.
So I have been using them wrong this whole time?
You are definitely not alone. This is one of the most common mix-ups we see, even from confident English speakers. And today, we're going to fix it completely.
Welcome to the English Speaking Show. I'm Jake.
And I'm Ella. Today, we're talking about finally and eventually, two words that look almost identical, but work in completely different ways.
By the end of this episode, you will know exactly when each one works. If that sounds useful, hit subscribe.
Finally, that is where you went wrong.
Right, and I want to understand why.
Finally is the word for when you have been waiting and the wait is now over.
And the key thing is the word carries how you feel about it.
Exactly. You are not just reporting what happened, you are saying the wait meant something to you.
Like last week, I finally fixed my kitchen drawer.
How long had it been broken?
Over a year.
A year?
I know, but when I finally fixed it, that word says everything, the relief, the embarrassment, all of it.
I have the same thing. I finally booked a dentist appointment last Tuesday.
How long had you been putting that off?
3 months. Every week, I will call tomorrow, I'll call tomorrow.
So finally carries that feeling, the wait, the delay, and then it happened.
And here's something people often get wrong. They think finally only works when something good happens.
But it does not.
Listen, she finally got the job. They finally gave up.
One is good news, one is not, but finally works in both.
Exactly, because the word is about the wait, not about whether the result is good or bad.
The feeling of the wait, not the outcome.
Now, position. Where does finally go?
Direct, before the main verb.
Correct. I finally finished my report. She finally arrived. He has finally called.
I made this mistake once. I finished finally my report.
That sounds wrong immediately.
It does. Finally goes before the verb, not after it, not between the verb and the object.
Before the verb. Always.
Now, back to my sentence this morning. First coffee, then emails, and eventually I started work.
That is the problem. Finally closes a sequence, eventually does not.
So, first coffee, then emails, and finally I started work.
Now it sounds complete. Finally tells the listener that's the last step, nothing comes after.
At the weekend, first I cleaned the flat, then I did the shopping, and finally I made dinner.
Exactly right. Let me give you one from work. First, I gathered the data, then I built the slides, and finally I sent the report.
That sounds completely natural.
And when you use eventually in that position, the sequence feels unfinished.
The list needs finally to feel closed.
Yes. Now, one tricky situation. Can you use finally to talk about the future?
Like, you will finally get that promotion?
That sounds a little strange, actually.
Why? I meant it as encouragement.
When finally goes into the future, it carries impatience, like the thing should have happened already.
So instead of encouraging someone, it sounds like a criticism.
Exactly. Finally usually looks back at a wait that is already happening. Push it into the future, and the feeling changes completely.
So for the future, we need a different word.
Which we are getting to right now. But first, one more thing finally can do.
What?
You can use it completely alone, one word. Like, Jake, I have been waiting here for 20 minutes.
Finally.
Hear that? No full sentence needed, just finally.
When someone arrives after you have been waiting, when something you hoped for has happened, one word says everything.
Try it with eventually. Eventually. Does not work at all.
Not even close. And that's actually a useful test. If you can say it alone as a reaction, it is finally.
So, finally is for when the wait is over and you felt it. It closes lists. It works alone as a one-word reaction. And it usually looks back, not forward.
So, what is the word that looks forward? The one that describes time without all that feeling?
Eventually. That is the word that looks forward.
And the big difference, eventually, is neutral.
No emotion, no feeling about the wait, just time passing.
Like, I eventually learned to cook properly.
How long did that take?
Years. I was ordering food 3 times a week for a long time.
But you eventually got there.
I eventually got there. And that sentence is just describing the timeline. Nothing emotional about it.
Same here. I eventually found a flat I liked, after about 6 months of searching.
Was it frustrating?
It was, but eventually, I am just reporting what happened, not how I felt about it.
No drama, just the facts.
Now, let us put the two words side by side. Same situation, different word.
Go.
I finally called.
I hear, she was waiting. She felt the wait. There is relief in that sentence.
I eventually called.
And now, at some point, he called. That's it. No emotion, just the timeline.
Same situation, completely different feeling.
And here's the rule. Say it with us.
Finally is about how you feel. The wait is over.
Eventually is about time. It will happen, but you do not know exactly when.
Say it out again to yourself. That one sentence will save you from most mistakes with these two words.
Now, eventually does something finally cannot do at all.
The future.
The future eventually looks forward. Listen, you will eventually find a job you love.
Calm, patient, certain. The thing will happen, just not yet.
Now try finally there. You will finally find a job you love.
That sounds frustrated, like the person should have found one already.
Exactly. Finally in the future carries impatience, even when you don't intend it.
Eventually in the future carries patience, certainty. The thing is coming, you just don't need to rush it.
I will eventually learn a second language properly.
Which one?
I haven't decided yet, which makes eventually the perfect word.
I will eventually move closer to my family. Not yet, but one day.
And that sentence feels completely natural.
Now position. Eventually is more flexible than finally.
How so?
Eventually can sit at the end of a sentence. Finally cannot do that naturally.
I knew I would get it done eventually.
Completely natural. Now try that with finally.
I knew I would get it done finally.
That sounds wrong immediately.
Because finally needs to sit before the verb. I finally finished. She finally arrived. It does not travel to the end.
But eventually can go before the verb or at the very end. Both work.
I eventually finished my project. Or I finished my project eventually.
Both natural, both correct. That flexibility is very useful in spoken English.
And eventually at the end of a sentence has a particular feeling. Patient, relaxed, like a quiet confidence that it was always going to happen.
Now the false friend. This one is very important.
If your first language is Spanish, Portuguese, or German, listen carefully.
In Spanish, the word eventualmente means maybe or perhaps. Same in Portuguese. In German, eventuell means the same thing.
So learners say, eventually I might go to the party, meaning perhaps I will go.
And that sounds very strange in English.
Because eventually in English does not mean maybe. It means the thing will happen. You are certain, just patient about when.
If you mean maybe, say maybe. If you mean perhaps, say perhaps.
Keep eventually for things that will definitely happen, just not yet.
And one more trap. Some learners say he is not coming eventually, meaning he will not come after all,
That sounds wrong immediately.
because eventually implies something will happen. It cannot describe something that does not occur.
So say, in the end, he is not coming. Or, after all, he is not coming.
Not eventually. Eventually needs something to actually happen.
So, eventually is neutral, just time passing. It looks forward into the future. It sits naturally at the end of a sentence, and it needs something to actually occur. And now, let us hear both words working together in a real conversation. We have two more things to show you that we have not covered yet.
Stay with us.
Consider that Ella and I work together. It is Monday morning. I have not seen her since last week. Ready?
Ready.
Morning. How was your weekend?
Jake, I got the promotion.
Finally!
I know.
How long have you been waiting for that?
2 years. I applied twice before. Both times, nothing.
So what changed?
I finally just went to my manager and asked for a direct conversation. Told him exactly what I wanted.
And?
A week later, they offered it.
You know what? I always knew you would eventually get there.
That is kind.
I mean it. Some things just take time.
That is exactly how it felt. Things eventually came together once I stopped waiting and started pushing.
Did you celebrate?
Of course. I had a team meeting on Friday. First, I thanked everyone for their support. Then I shared the news. And finally, I told them my plans for the team going forward.
Very professional.
I had been preparing that speech for 2 years. Eventually, the moment arrived.
And outside of work?
I called my family. My brother picked up after about 10 rings.
10 rings.
I said, "So you decided to answer eventually?"
I love that.
He knew exactly what I meant.
Okay, let us break that down. Did you catch everything?
Let's go through it.
First, I finally just went to my manager. Why finally?
The wait was over. She had been building up to that conversation for a long time. Finally carries that weight, the relief, the decision made after a long wait.
Second, I always knew you would eventually get there. Why eventually?
Jake is looking forward in retrospect. Patient, certain, no specific emotion about the wait, just confidence in the outcome.
Third, things eventually came together. Same idea?
Same idea, describing a process over time, neutral, just the timeline.
Now the team meeting. First, I thanked everyone for their support, then I shared the news, and finally, I told them my plans for the team going forward.
List use, we know this one. 3 steps. The last one closes with finally.
But notice, this is a slightly different situation. Ella is not describing steps in a task, she is closing a speech, a formal moment.
And that is actually a very common use of finally that we haven't talked about yet. Finally closes formal moments, presentations, speeches, meetings.
When you're wrapping up something official, finally signals the last point. Finally, I would like to thank my team. Finally, let me address your questions. Finally, here's what we decided.
It tells the listener, we're almost done. This is the last thing.
Very useful in workplace English, meetings, presentations, emails.
And the last one, so you decided to answer eventually.
That felt different from the other uses of eventually.
Because it is. Eventually, at the end of a sentence with a pause before it, can carry a completely different feeling. Mild sarcasm, mild accusation.
So you decided to show up. Eventually. So you finally finished. Eventually.
The pause does all the work. It says, this took longer than it should have, and I noticed.
And it's not angry, it's not harsh, just a quiet, I see you.
And native speakers use it like that constantly. It's very natural in real conversation.
So, 2 words and between them a lot of ground to cover.
Stay with us for the recap.
Let us bring it all together.
Finally is about how you feel. The wait is over. It carries relief, satisfaction, sometimes frustration, the emotion of the wait.
It closes lists and sequences. It closes formal moments, speeches, presentations, meetings.
And you can say it completely alone, finally, as a one-word reaction.
Eventually is about time. Something will happen, you just do not know exactly when. No emotion, just the timeline.
It looks forward into the future. It sits naturally at the end of a sentence. And with a pause, so you decided to show up, eventually, it carries a quiet sarcasm.
And the rule one more time. Say it with us.
Finally is about how you feel. The wait is over.
Eventually is about time. It will happen, but you do not know exactly when.
Keep that with you. It will solve most situations.
Now, your turn. Write one sentence in the comments using finally or eventually. Tell us something you are still waiting for or something you will eventually do. For example, I will eventually visit Japan, or I finally called my mother last week. Your turn.
And if you want to keep going, we did a full episode on by, until, and till. 3 more words that look simple but cause real confusion. The link is right there.
Subscribe so you do not miss a single episode. We are here every week.
See you in the next one.
See you then.